in 2011, how they are now, and how the stakeholders, the mandate that I implement as the Special Rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs is guided by resolutions of the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. It is therefore imperative for me to apply the compliance under international human rights law as far as the evacuees or the IDPs in Japan are concerned. The guiding principles on internal displacement provide that IDPs are persons or groups of persons who have been forced or obliged to leave their homes or residence, in particular to avoid the effects of natural or human-made disasters as far as this case is concerned. Therefore, in the context of the consequences of the Fukushima disaster in 2011, it is very clear that both the so-called mandatory evacuees, those who were displaced because of forced evacuation orders, and voluntary evacuees, or those who displaced themselves despite not being ordered to, are IDPs on equal basis under international law. The right to evacuate, as triggered by disasters, is a human right based on freedom of movement, even though they have not been ordered to evacuate. In my end of mission statement, my findings concentrate on the rights of IDPs, first of all in displacement, and on the second part, on the rights of IDPs in durable solutions, which I will explain further. From my investigation, the following are the priority rights of IDPs that need to be further responded to. The first one is the right to safety and security with the right to housing. The second is the right to family life. The third is the right to livelihood. The fourth right is the right to health. The fifth is the right to education, especially for children. And the sixth is the right to participation of the IDPs in decisions affecting them. I have chosen these specific rights on the basis of the testimonies given to me by the IDPs themselves. For example, under the right to livelihood, it has been seen that at least 20% of IDPs who can work are actually unemployed. And this is a high rate of unemployment compared to the general unemployment rate of Japan, which is only 3%. Another right that is also problematic is the right to health. And there is considerable concern about the continuing effects of radiation exposure, especially to children who are now young adults, and as well as the other anxiety and PTSD that is very much suffered by many IDPs. I would like to go to the rights of IDPs in durable solutions. I would like to stress that return is a choice and cannot be forced on IDPs. It is therefore important to understand that any durable solutions chosen by IDPs, whether to return, to stay in evacuation, or to go elsewhere, should be based on full information and actually made on the basis of voluntary decision. I would like to highlight three important criteria or rights that are important with regard to the durable solutions of IDPs. The first one is adequate standard of living, including the restoration of housing, land, and property. The second one is access to employment and livelihoods should they return to the original place of residence. And lastly, they have to have effective remedies for the violations related to the displacement, including reparations and full information about the causes of violations. On each of these 6 rights during displacement and 3 rights that I put priority for durable solutions for the IDPs, I would like to say that many Japanese authorities, from central to prefecture to local, are trying to address it. At the same time, I would like to stress that there has to be an improvement, and this is the reason I am making recommendations for each of those rights I mentioned. Before I move on to my preliminary general conclusions, I would like to emphasize that in all these rights, in the implementation of all these rights, the internally displaced persons or the IDPs must be provided conditions to participate in decisions affecting them. They must have the right to make their voices heard, and they must have the right to provide what they want in terms of decision-making and motivation. At this point in time, and in view of my initial observations, I hereby present to you 3 preliminary conclusions. The first is that IDPs or evacuees, regardless of whether they come from areas designated as where forced evacuation orders were enforced, are all internally displaced persons, voluntary and forced. They have the same rights and entitlements as citizens of Japan. The categorization of forced evacuees and voluntary evacuees, especially when it comes to receiving support and assistance, should therefore be dropped in practice. Humanitarian protection and support should be based on their actual rights and actual needs, not on the basis of a status-based categorization, which has no justification under international law. Second, the ongoing initiatives of the Japanese government should be enhanced with a human rights-based approach that include both IDPs and the residents of Fukushima together, so that there would be an area-based approach to the reconstruction of Fukushima in an inclusive manner. This approach should include community strategies for housing and recovery of land and property and housing, and health, livelihoods, and safety for the residents of Fukushima, as well as for those returning from evacuation. And this approach necessitates the inclusion of full information and with the participation of 1, IDPs in evacuation, Second, those returning IDPs. And third, the current residents of Fukushima, so that there can be social cohesion. Lastly, for the remaining IDPs in evacuation who are still in a very vulnerable situation, there should be continued support, especially housing for vulnerable populations like the elderly, persons with disabilities, and the like, and as well conditions for livelihood, including the context of social integration in the host community. I would like to say that the guarantee of the implementation of the rights of IDPs in evacuation would contribute greatly to social cohesion, both in the area of evacuation and eventually in their return, should they choose voluntarily to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, this mission has been very important in the promotion of the human rights of internally displaced persons in Japan, who remain, especially those in evacuation, and continue to suffer from the effects even 11 years hence. It is very, very important, therefore, that I highly recommend that attention, continuing attention to the human rights of IDPs be sustained, and particularly with regard to the rights of IDPs that I have pointed out during this session. Thank you very much for your attention.